Good morning, everyone. My name is Rohit. I am with the AWS product marketing team. Welcome to this session. Realize it's Friday morning, early morning, so thanks for coming. It's my privilege and honor to introduce the next speaker to you, Eric-Geiger from Federal Home Loan Bank of Chicago. Governance has been a hot topic for this conference, how enterprises are adopting AWS and how they are tackling governance. So this is going to be an amazing, fantastic talk on how bank and Eric's team were able to tackle this issue. So with that, let me hand it over to Eric. Thank you so much. Welcome.
Thank you. An amazing and fantastic talk. Hi, my name is Eric-Geiger. I'm the managing director of IT operations for the Federal Home Loan Bank of Chicago. And I want to take you through some of the things that we did before we moved into Amazon, after we moved into Amazon, and then some continuous things that we've been doing ever since then. So first, a little bit about us. Like a lot of Amazon's customers, we're a young, hip startup. So back in 1932, after the Great Depression, Congress created the Federal Home Loan Banking System. It was a way of providing liquidity and money to banks so that people could get loans for houses. And for the last 80-ish years, it's been the same mission that we've been performing. There are a number of home loan banks across the United States, and we serve about 7,500 members. The important thing, though, about us, which is actually similar to a lot of young startup companies, is that we have somebody, whether it's our board of directors or a federal regulator or an executive team, we have somebody that expects us to perform our jobs safely and soundly. And on a regular basis, we have to prove to them that we're doing that. So a few years ago, we were looking at some different options for our infrastructure. We had a lot of servers that were only working part-time. We had a lot of servers that were barely working at all after the projects that we had bought them for had finished. And we had a lot of development that required new things to happen very, very quickly. And I'm sure a lot of you have been in similar situations. And so we looked for some other options for how we could provision our equipment, faster provisioning, more flexible provisioning. And of course, in time, that led us over to Amazon. Now, there were a couple other competitors at the time. You might have heard of them, small companies like Microsoft and Google. But they were providing a whole different paradigm. It was that platform paradigm, which didn't work. Amazon was providing infrastructure. They were a leader in the space. They had a lot of options. And one of the things about Amazon is that it was very easy to start, almost too easy to start using Amazon. The other nice thing was that you could provision equipment quickly and you could see very fast results. So naturally, we really wanted to go there, and we wanted to go there fast, but there were some problems. There were some security concerns that came up. We weren't sure that the performance would be that good. Amazon doesn't give you virtual CPUs. They give you virtual ECUs. Those are not the same thing. And of course, we were concerned about the reliability. It just so happens, in a perfect, just moment of coincidence, that Amazon, the week we were looking at them seriously, had probably one of their biggest outages in their Virginia zone of all time. You can imagine that cast some doubt across our executive team. So we needed to do some due diligence, and these are the general things that we covered. And I'm going to take you through each one of them as we go. As I said, some of these we did before we moved to Amazon. Some of them we did after we had equipment there. But the reality is that a number of them, in fact, are continuous. You never stop looking at your cost. You never stop thinking about security, and you never stop doing monitoring on your infrastructure. And none of that changes. Frankly, it's true whether or not you're in Amazon. And in Amazon, it's even more so the case. So first, let's talk a little bit about communication. There are a lot of preconceived notions when you talk to your executive team who are not technical, when you talk to your board of directors who may or may not be technical, about going into the cloud. And this first line is, in fact, a real quote said to me by one of our executive team members when I mentioned using Amazon Web Services. So, but Eric, Amazon is just a bookstore, isn't it? How do you answer that question if you don't have a huge amount of research ready to go for that? Because I'll tell you, everybody that works in your company uses Amazon. None of them use them for Amazon Web Services. So you have to be ready to explain it. And then, of course, the cloud isn't secure. Oh, the cloud isn't secure. Google is your worst nightmare here. Cloud security. You will get thousands of things saying, beware, beware, beware. And you have to get ready and prepare yourself to be able to answer those questions. So, get educated. And when I say get educated, I don't necessarily mean you personally, obviously. You should know a lot about what it is that you're trying to sell to your investors and your executives and your presidents. But you need to get them educated. Now, Amazon provides you with a lot of great white papers, a lot of really interesting things, high-level overviews, things that aren't really necessary for the technical folks, but that can serve you very well when talking to your executives. It won't be good enough, though, to send them a link. It won't be good enough because they're busy. So one of the things that we did, and one of the things that I think is very useful, is that we took some of the key white papers, the overview of the web services, what it is that they even are, the risk and compliance white papers. We went through them, we highlighted the key sections, and then we invited our executives to lunch. And we sat down with those docs, and we went through those docs, and we hit all those key points so that our executives were well informed. And that's helpful because the executives are the ones that go in, oftentimes talk to the board members. Our executives did a similar thing with our board members. We came in and talked to our board members and explained what it was that Amazon even was, other than a bookstore. And we begin to get some really good traction. The other thing you want to do is look at these compliance sites that Amazon has. You want to talk to your internal audit departments. If you're an enterprise organization, you have an internal audit department. If you're not, you might very well have third-party auditors, external auditors. There are a lot of people who are going to review your decisions, and you want to educate them as well. Because I will tell you from experience that you're going to know more about Amazon than they do. They're going to have worked off of some kind of white paper that they read that said, here are the 10 things you want to make sure are covered in the cloud, but those might not be the 10 things you really want them to walk away with. So take them through the docs the same way you took your executive team through it. The other thing you want everyone to understand is that moving to Amazon is a lot more than just moving infrastructure. Moving infrastructure, that's easy. Pick up an app, slide it over. But Amazon changes a lot of things. It changes how you think about security. It changes how you think about cost and price. It changes a number of things. And you want to paint that picture to your executives. You don't want them to just think, oh, this is a simple data center move, no problem. We'll do that. We do that all the time. It's not the case. Finally, as you're looking for things outside of Amazon, if you're us, we're regulated by the federal government. If you're lucky enough to also be regulated by the federal government, you can find a number of governmental agencies that have guidance on Amazon, that have feelings about the cloud, and you can use those in your discussions. It's one thing when your internal auditor says, boy, I don't know, I'm not sure it's safe. To be able to then take a piece of paper from a governmental agency and go, well, hey, here's kind of what this federal regulator thinks about it. They don't think it's so bad. That bears a lot of weight. And then finally, at the end of the day, you've done all of this education. What is that education really good for? It ensures broad business buy-in. You want to have that meeting with your president and with your board or with your investors, with whomever, and you want them at the end of that meeting to say, you know what, that's a great idea. We should go to Amazon. There might be some considerations or some concerns at that point, but you're going to be able to go through with their blessing. And having the blessing of those folks is going to get you through a lot of hiccups as you go down the road, because there are going to be a couple of them. So now that you've got it, what do? Yeah, man, give Amazon your credit card and just migrate your whole business over there. No problem. It's just that simple. Except maybe you want to go a little slower. So try a small proof of concept. And when I say a proof of concept, interestingly, I don't mean a proof of concept, does Amazon work? Amazon works. It's going to work great for you. But the proof of concept is really for you to level set your expectations for what you get. Amazon is not a magic bullet. When you move there for the first time, it will not provision servers for you and migrate your apps for you and auto-scale and load balance and do everything out of the box for you. That does not happen. There's a lot of work that goes into that. And you're not really going to be able to appreciate that, even if you've read those white papers. You're not really going to be able to appreciate that until you give it a whirl. So start that small proof of concept. And when you go into it, think about what it is that you're going to use Amazon even for. Amazon does a lot. It does more every day. It does more after this outing. How many new things came out in the keynotes? So think about what you're going to use it for. Are you just going to have a website? Because I'll tell you something. That's one whole set, one whole way of looking at how you're going to use Amazon, as opposed to, if you're us, at the bank, we're going to use it for core infrastructure. We're going to extend our data center into Amazon. It's a different thing. It's another different thing if you're going to put key data there, secure data, non-public data. It changes the way you look at it. And you want to understand going into your proof of concept what your core objective is so that you can really test the right components. Now, saying that, once you get there, explore the other service options. A great example is if you want to do a website there, it's easy enough. Spin up a website. But I'll tell you what, during your proof of concept is the time to think to yourself, what about that load balancing component? Or what about the messaging component? What about the auto-scaling component? Those are all things that you will ultimately want if that website is successful. And this is a great time to give them a whirl. And finally, there are some important considerations, some basic things that I think you really want to cover. The biggest one is pick a region or zone that's close. There's something alluring about going onto Amazon and saying, I can put my servers in Singapore? That's cool. And your other technicians will think that that's cool. But the reality is you're just doing a proof of concept. You will have plenty of time to spread your stuff out. So pick a region that's close. And then set up a VPC, the Amazon Virtual Private Cloud. I'm going to say this 4 more times. I'm not even sure why people don't use Amazon Virtual Private Clouds at this point. They fundamentally make things more secure. They make things a little easier for you. They make things more manageable. Do your POC with a VPC so you can begin to understand how the VPC works, how your IP assignments work inside of it. And then, sort of the make or break part for a lot of this is test your network connectivity. You get to Amazon through the internet, obviously. You could also get there through a VPN, through the internet. And you can also get there through a direct connect over the internet. And all of those things give you different bandwidth, different latency, different capabilities. And you may not need anything other than just a straight internet connection. You may find, like us, if you're extending your data center, a traditional data center, you cannot function by just using the internet. You need to go to a direct connect. The latency is terrible. Or they're somewhere in the middle with a VPN, provisionable bandwidth. So test those things. After you've tested them, hey, Amazon's going to work. You're pretty comfortable with it. Here comes the hardest part. You want to do an evaluation of your controls against what Amazon promises that they are controlling. This takes time. It takes a lot of work. It's somewhat unpleasant. And it can point out some inconsistencies or some weaknesses in your own control framework. But I assure you that this effort will be well worth it. So Amazon has a lot of certifications and accreditations. They cover almost every letter of the alphabet. They need to find something with a Z in it, and they would really be there. But a lot of these certifications don't mean much to you. I mean, HIPAA compliance is great if you're in healthcare. PCI is great if you're processing credit cards. But by themselves, they're just acronyms that look impressive on paper. And more importantly, those are certifications that Amazon has. You can use Amazon infrastructure to do something with credit card processing that will not be PCI compliant. Don't think for a minute that these apply to you. These apply to Amazon. And so what you want to do is find something or some way of mapping those to your key controls, your SOX controls, your important controls. And most of you, especially if you're in the enterprise level, you have a doc somewhere. Your audit department owns it. Risk, your risk group owns it. that says these are the things that are important to us. These are our controls. These are what we want to follow. And you want to evaluate Amazon against that. So there's a partner that we used called the Cloud Security Alliance. There are other ones as well, but we happen to really like this one. They have a whole framework for how to do an evaluation of your controls against Amazon. It's a great framework. It worked really well. But again, it's time-consuming. I'll show you what it kind of looks like. It's a time-consuming process, and it needs to be done by people outside of just the IT folks who are going to implement something in Amazon. You want it to be done by your IT security folks. You want it to be done by your internal audit. You, of course, want it done by your ops folks. You're all going to play a role in it. And here's kind of what you get. So this is a doc that we got through the Cloud Security Alliance. And it's easy to read. It doesn't cover much data. So this is half of a page of about a 50-page doc. Tell me about it. What does it really mean, though? So here's how this doc breaks down. On the left-hand side are our internal controls and Cloud Security Alliance internal controls that we might not have had initially. We have them now because they're great ideas for when you move to the cloud. The second column in, that's where we evaluated Amazon's SOC 1, 2, 3, Amazon's PCI compliance and HIPAA compliance. And we figured out how those things mapped against our controls. All of the document, or all of the data that you see in that align with AWS internal controls piece, those are our folks saying, we found that in this doc. So for example, all of you have a control, or should have a control, that says that the data center doors are locked. You don't just leave the doors open for any random person to come walking in and press a button and turn something off. That would be insanity. So everyone has a control, a physical control that the doors are locked. Well, Amazon says our doors are locked. Where do they say it? You can't just take it for granted. But if you go through their SOC 1, you'll find a section on physical controls. If you go through the physical controls, you'll find a section on data centers. And in the section on the data center, you'll find a line that says, we lock our doors. Great. That's how you do your mapping. The first one of those things are done. You only have 98 more to go. The internal risk rating component is where you give a chance for your auditors or internally your IT security folks to say how important that control is. We lock our doors. It's an important control, so we're going to rate it as high. And we might have some comments on it. Of course we lock our doors. Don't be ridiculous. We then have team comments. Team comments can be things like, Amazon has it and it's here, but we're not sure it's detailed enough. Or it seems like it's here, but we're not sure it's really covered. Or it's absolutely here and it's way more advanced than we had expected. You give a chance to have your team comments that begins to allow you to create a narrative and paint a story. The architectural relevance, that's really just a searchable field for us. How does this control relate to, or what does this control relate to? Is it to your SAN? Is it your servers? Is it your network? Because sooner or later, we're going to have an auditor that says, hey, what are your network controls? We can do a nice pivot table, pull that data up, and give it to them. And then finally, and probably the most insane part of this entire doc, is the alignment with industry standard frameworks. And here's what I mean by that. That whole section at the top covers things like NIST, COBIT, ISO 27001, all of these great frameworks that you've heard. So I have a control that says I lock my doors. I see that Amazon covers that, and they cover it in their SOC 1. And then I can see that they lock their doors. That's an equivalent requirement for these NIST controls, these COBIT controls, these ISO 27001 controls. And we do that because we never know what auditing firm we're going to get. Could be any of the big four. And when they come in, they may have a preconceived notion about how we should be complying with NIST, or we should be complying with COBIT. And we want to be able to paint a picture for them that says, oh, you like NIST? Well, I tell you what, here's how all of these controls align to NIST. This took us weeks and weeks to do, and it created a great document. And with that document, we began to create a packet of information from a compliance and control perspective that we could give to anybody that had questions or questioned why it is that we use these things. And we have presented this document to our federal regulators, to our internal audit, to a number of other organizations to great success. So I would encourage everybody to strongly consider going through it. So now you've done your POC. You see that Amazon's controls line up. You're feeling pretty good about it. You're feeling pretty safe. So you're going to start to spin up instances, and you're going to want to consider how much all of it's going to cost. So first, let me lead into this by saying, in our organization, we definitely reduced expense by moving equipment into Amazon. There's no doubt about that. But it's not as straightforward as a lot of people might think. So instances, an instance has a cost. You use it for a time. And you have so many instances. So one instance, 24 hours a day, 30 days of the month. That's how much Amazon costs. Now, that might be how much Amazon's going to bill for that specific instance. There are more things to consider. First off, it is so easy to create instances that you create one. And then somebody says, I could use another one. And you go, yeah, sure, it's easy. Boom, you create another one. The next thing you know, you have 50. And you think to yourself, how the hell did I get 50 instances at Amazon? It's a lot easier than you think. Scope creep, instance creep, it's a real problem. So you want to make sure that you're watching your instances as they're getting created. You also want to make sure that as you have instances, you're considering whether or not they need to be on-demand instances or whether they should be reserved instances. If you're using it 24 hours a day, every day, all of the time, it should be a reserved instance. You'll save half of the cost-ish. If you're using it half of the day, every day of the month, you might want to consider sticking with an on-demand instance. There is a price point, and you can find that price point out with some clever Excel work. But you need to make sure that you're doing that analysis, because over time, obviously, you want to drive down your costs. So using reserved instances where appropriate makes a lot of sense. Sticking to on-demand instances makes a lot of sense. But there are other cost considerations. So now you've moved your infrastructure. You've got that instance up. There's nothing else to worry about, right? Wrong. Just because you're using Amazon, they have this shared responsibility model. And that model more or less ends at, here's your instance. There are a lot of traditional IT jobs that you have to consider when you have Amazon, and those IT jobs equate to continued spend that you're already either spending or new spend. You know, for example, you're still going to have somebody that does provisioning. Jeff hasn't worked out a way to have you just mentally provision servers yet. I'm sure he's getting there. You're going to have to do patching on those servers. You know, the instances, the AMIs, when they spin up, they have the latest patches at that moment in time. But when Microsoft rolls out a new patch, it's not going to be on there. You're going to need to patch it. Software installs, backups, antivirus, all those things have to extend because it's your infrastructure. You have to cover all those costs. The other thing about Amazon is that when you bring up instances, because of some limitations or because of some considerations around security, you might actually find that you need to do more on the Amazon instance. Specifically, in our case, looking at firewalls on the hosts, looking at IDS on the hosts. You know, that's a cost we don't have today in our traditional data center because we handled all the network layer. But you can't do it at the network layer in Amazon. So you might need to consider some additional costs. Those things being said, there are some really clever ways to reduce your cost dramatically. The first is the ability to auto stop and start instances. And I can't encourage this enough. If you're like us, a bank, our people go home for the most part at 5. Our systems, for the most part, sit idle. We can turn those systems off. So now, you're not running it 24 hours a day, 30 days a year. You're running it 10 hours a day, 20 days a year. You've cut that instance price in half just by stopping it during low use time. That's a big benefit. Has to be managed, have to keep an eye on it, but it's a big benefit. The other thing we like to do is CloudWatch is this really nice monitoring tool. You know, it's billed as being able to watch the CPU usage, the thresholds, those sorts of things. We'll talk about that in a second. But the other thing that it can do is it can watch your spending thresholds. So let's just say you're using Amazon, you're spending $10,000 a month at Amazon. Great job, you're really using it. With CloudWatch, you can put a threshold on $5,000, and it will alert you when you hit $5,000. So if you expect to spend $10,000 that month, if your alert goes off on the 4th day of the month, something's really wrong. One of your techs has gone insane and spun up a massive amount of instances. Conversely, if it's the 22nd day of the month when that alert goes off, you know that somebody has done something potentially clever or horrible and shut off a bunch of instances. So you can keep track of those things, and CloudWatch is a really great tool that provides reporting on a standard basis that you can use, that you can, again, put into that packet of information so that when you go forward, you can say, here's the thresholds we're watching to keep our cost in check. Here are the things that we're doing. So now you're there, you're monitoring cost, your instances are spinning up, things are looking great. Time to keep an eye on your infrastructure. CloudWatch. It's your first choice. It's your first go-to because it'll monitor all the basic information you need. Now, as a free advertisement for Amazon, let me just say, you should pay for the detailed monitoring. The difference is that detailed monitoring gives you reporting on those metrics much more frequently. If you're seriously looking at CloudWatch as a tool for monitoring thresholds, getting reports every 5 to 15 minutes is not enough. You want to get them every minute at least. So, detailed monitoring is a must. You then set CloudWatch up on your thresholds for your CPU, your network, your disk, whatever other physical attributes you want to watch. When things go wrong, you get an email alert. You can then have your technicians go and take a look and see what's happening. It's a big benefit. It's a simple one. CloudWatch is easy to set up. But CloudWatch has some limitations. There's another part of the Amazon ecosystem called events that you also want to watch. And this is a little more complicated because it requires, today anyway, that you're a little more familiar with the Amazon API. So first, what are the events we're talking about? If an instance stops, which can happen, something goes wrong, the instance itself stops. If an instance reboots, if an instance is terminated, meaning you're not getting it back, or if an instance is created, those are events. And you can use that API through whatever scheduling product you have. Okay, I get it. Sorry, this side of the room. Through whatever scheduling product you have, you can use that API, and you can have those events reported to you also on a regular basis. You know, it's very important to understand when your instances get shut down, because of course, a lot of people are going to be able to do it. All of your IT admins have a chance to possibly be able to do it. And if you're running critical applications, and suddenly you get an alert that says an instance was shut down, you can imagine some exciting things start to happen. And then finally, CloudWatch, like I said, it's great. It's basic. And it's probably not enough. A lot of you, if you're enterprise customers or otherwise, probably have a third-party tool that you're already using. Your BMCs, your Microsofts, your CAs, whatever they are. Because you have full control of that instance, you can install your agents right on top of it. So whatever you're doing in your infrastructure today, you can extend that exact same model into your existing or into your Amazon ecosystem. You don't have to change anything. You don't have to change your scripts. You don't have to change your thresholds. It'll pick all of those things up, and those systems running at Amazon will continue to work and will continue to report. When we talk about using the Amazon API to do event monitoring, we can use our existing monitoring system, happens to be Microsoft. We can use it to execute those scripts. We can use it to collect the data when it comes back. And you should also. The nice thing about it is that it doesn't change your basic operating model. So today, you're responsible IT folks, you have regular reporting, you simply extend it, and that helps. Now the scarier monitoring, security monitoring. Dun, dun, dun. So one of the preconceived notions about the cloud is that it's not safe. And that's a problem that it's a notion. You need to have security monitoring in place that's effective and reliable. And if you're in Amazon and you've used the whole Amazon ecosystem to create your application, that's not as hard as it might otherwise be. If you're us, the bank, or any of you that are extending your data centers into Amazon, and you have a traditional security team that loves their firewalls, that watch network traffic, that want to see how the ACLs work across the VPNs, it starts to get a little more hairy. So traditional security becomes an issue. And this new thing that Amazon announced, CloudTrail, that's a step in the right direction. But it still, today, doesn't give you transparency to that network layer. And that's a big problem for traditional monitoring because all of the traditional tools, firewalls, Splunk, doesn't do anything without log files. They're just not going to work. So how do you get around it? What can you do? Great question. Thank you. There are some things you can do to mitigate it. First off, and I said it before that I'm going to mention VPCs. Well, here's where I'm going to mention them. Always use VPCs. And don't use them sparingly. Separate your dev test environment into a virtual private cloud. Separate your production environment into a virtual private cloud. For God's sakes, put your internet stuff into a virtual private cloud. All on its own, all locked down, with very little ability to talk to any of your other stuff. You can monitor the traffic between VPCs slightly better than you can monitor traffic in VPCs. So that's helpful. It gives you more insight. You can also control the VPCs very tightly. And that's helpful. Inside those things, consider using host-based products instead of network-based products. As I already said, network-based products, unfortunately, the ecosystem just doesn't really support them. It does support host-based products. And since you're already using the monitoring tools that you had before, those tools probably have plugins that will help you manage those host-based products. Because, if you've got 400 instances running in Amazon, who wants to manage 400 firewalls? That's a pain. But luckily, there are tools to help you do that. As the traffic then flows between those different instances, you can do the traffic monitoring much better than you could otherwise. And today, it's probably one of the better solutions that you're going to be able to get to do that monitoring. When possible, consider letting all of your traffic flow through your traditional on-prem data center. Now, if you're a pure startup and you're only in Amazon, obviously, this doesn't necessarily pertain to you. If you're a company that has a traditional data center, though, and you've got your direct connect or your VPN, have your traffic route through your data center. Now you have your actual firewall. It's monitoring all the traffic going in and coming out. It gives you real good inspection of what's happening. And if you're like us and you have a direct connect, now you can go full on crazy. And you can have a firewall on your on-prem data center talking to the firewall on the direct connect. You can monitor everything. And it's much more comforting for your security folks today. Now, I will say, this will all change over time. Right? Doing work in the cloud is different than doing work in a traditional data center. But for now, you have to be able to address some of the concerns that these folks are going to have. And this is a good way to do it. Finally, lock down your console. Seems like a no-brainer, but it's worth saying because some people forget. You created an Amazon account with a credit card and one user ID. And because you didn't think about it, you gave that user ID to 2 other guys in your shop because you know what? You want them to have a look at it too. And then they gave it to another guy in the shop. Next thing you know, you've got 10 people all using the same user ID that can access your critical infrastructure from anywhere in the world through a web browser. It's kind of a terrifying proposition. So you should lock that thing down. First off, you should use multi-factor authentication. First off, you shouldn't have one ID. Let's start there. Everybody who's going to access Amazon in any way, shape, or form, you give them their own IDs. Then you should have multi-factor authentication. Amazon has made it ridiculously simple to turn multi-factor authentication on. You enable it, you take your phone, you scan a barcode, you ironically use Google Authenticator, and it works great. Amazon has an authenticator product as well, but we use Google. And then finally, limit the access. The nice thing about the console is you can say, these folks can do these things. These folks can do these things. It's not an all or nothing proposition. So you should create, essentially, a role model that says, these types of admins have this access, these types of admins have this access. You should stick that in your packet of things, and you should create and adhere to that throughout the rest of your life cycle with Amazon. You should update it periodically as appropriate, but you should stick with it. No exceptions. And then finally, disaster planning. So, obviously, everyone wants to do DR. But there's something to consider about the terms and services of Amazon that a lot of people may not realize. Amazon is super reliable. It's not 5 nines reliable. It's not even 4 nines reliable. If you're on the EC2 instances, which is where all of your infrastructure is, it's 99.95. So, through basic consideration, that's 3.5 hours of downtime a month. And of course, since a lot of you are technical professionals, you know that downtime only happens on weekends when nothing will be impacted. And you have all the time in the world to recover. Downtime never happens at 7:30 when Wall Street opens for a banking company. So you have to consider the fact that that SLA, it's not that great. The other thing you need to consider is that your zone will be degraded. When I talk about disasters with Amazon, I don't talk about your instance going down. Because if your instance goes down, you can just spin another instance up. That's easy. I talk about your whole zone going down. In Amazon's own white paper on disaster recovery, they mention that you should expect that your zone will become unavailable at least one time during the year. It's a heck of a statement. So you have to plan for it, and you have to be ready for it. And there are a couple of basic things that you can do for it, and you can document those things, and you can stick them as the final piece of doc in this big stack of compliance and how you're going to handle your general monitoring. The first thing, of course, is you can create snapshots of your AMIs. These Amazon machine images and the ability to take pictures of them, a picture of your server with all of its patches and all of its disks. You can take a snapshot of it and you can stick it in S3. And in S3, you can send it over to the West Coast or the East Coast, whatever coast you're not on. Send it to Oregon. Save yourself some money if you have to recover it. So that's the first thing you can do. It's ready to go. If there's a disaster and you suddenly want to spin up in the West Coast, you've got your AMIs all sitting there. You can spin them up. The other thing you can do, take snapshots. Amazon has a very nice snapshotting tool. Again, you need to use the API. There's a lot of things you need to use the API for in Amazon. But if you have people familiar with it, you can do a lot of really clever things with it. So you can take snapshots of your instances, and with those snapshots, you can migrate them to other zones and regions through S3 or directly copy them, giving yourself a little more secure posture, a little safer posture. And then finally, keeping it all in S3, interestingly, the reliability of S3 is 5 nines, I think. The reliability of S3 is 5 nines. So where the EC2 instances reliability is a little lower, having your backups in S3 gives you much more reassurance that you'll be able to get those things up and running in another zone, or in our case, another region. Amazon will say use multiple zones, use multiple zones. I will say if you can, use multiple regions. I don't trust one zone or one region to be able to stay going for all time, so always consider other regions. So we've covered a lot of things, and at the end, what we really have, hopefully, is this nice compliance document that you're going to walk out with. You do the legwork, you compare everything together, and when your audit department or your regulator or whomever, and they approach you and they say, hey, what about this, what about that? You've got this great series of things together, ready to go, ready to give them. Having that prepared ahead of time will save you an enormous amount of headache, because there's nothing auditors hate more than, oh yeah, let me go get that for you. And I would strongly encourage you all to do it. So that's all I have today.